So I just wanted to make this quick video that goes over what a startup should do, basically, if they're trying to get started with SEO, but just don't really have the marketing budget for it. Luckily, especially for inbound channels, SEO, email marketing, social media, you don't have to pay anything to market yourselves through those channels. It's not like outbound, like PPC, paid advertisements, social ads, where you actively have to pay an ad to position yourself in front of where you're trying to go. With SEO, really, the main focus of it is creating content that Google is going to find relevant and position it in front of the users that are they're actively searching for those terms. I figured with SEO specific, especially, I think it's the most scalable channel when it comes to startups, and it can be the easiest for them to get started with. It's not like email where you have to build up an audience. It's not like social. SEO, as soon as you start creating content, you can have that content positioned in front of the people that you want to target. So basically, I just want to explain a few ways that you can go after your audience without really having to spend thousands of dollars on SEO. So the first tip I have here is basically to first things first, just always have your ICP identified. Make sure for a fact who you're going after, who you're trying to target, basically which companies they work at, what position they have, why they'd be needing your software, what type of pain points they have. You basically have to have that entire ICP mapped out so you can basically understand the frustrations that they have and how you can market your product within your content. I would also argue that you'd probably want to have your positioning figured out as well too. If you don't have your positioning set in, let's say your category is ever evolving, you guys keep coming up with a different category that you want to position yourselves in, it's really going to make it hard for your SEO to actually deliver over the long term if we have to keep basically re-optimizing your content. We have to restructure your content. If it's a new category every few months, then we're not going to be able to be consistent with our content and see the best results. So when it comes to SEO specifically, it's best that we have a defined position and a defined ICP before we even get started with anything. And that can really be what I recommend to most companies is to have a section on your website that really lists out what your product is capable of and who your product is for. In the case of Vanta, they have a category that talks about how their product works for startups, how their product works for mid-market companies, and then, of course, how their product works for enterprise companies. That's obviously just an industry page that they have built out. If you go to their blog content, they're likely going to have other topics that are based around that ICP. Privacy compliance for startups, how to keep your startup compliant or compliant with data regulations, basically anything that is specific to their company, they're at least going to know, okay, so my product is specifically for data compliance and my product is specifically for this ICP. So there's nothing that's really going to change in the long term. You at least know this is something that you can continue with consistently without having to really redo all of your work later on. So the next thing I would recommend, this is number two, is to have sales enablement content build out. So it's sales enablement content is very easy to build out, especially if you're a startup. It doesn't cost any money to build it out. And basically what sales enablement content is going to be is typically a case study. Basically anything that can just show a customer study that your product was capable of, any type of measurable results, and specifically what you were able to do with the company. Usually if you come to these, sometimes they're going to be a PDF. I usually recommend just having them on the website, but usually you're going to want to have some data just showing what your product was able to help this company out with. If there's any basically problems that they were handling, what the new solution was. Obviously the solution is going to be your company. And then at the very end, usually you're going to talk about results, which really they put the results front and center, which is probably the best idea here. But obviously, when it comes to sales enablement, you want to have resources, you want to have case studies, you want to have pricing information, you want to have a product page, basically anything that's going to help a user better understand what your product is capable of. So the next thing you're going to want to do, number three, is basically focus on bottom of funnel content whenever you're starting out your content strategy. So one thing I really see most companies getting wrong, and honestly, this is a mistake that startups can't afford to get wrong, is creating content that isn't going to drive any meaningful results. Basically targeting topics that aren't relevant to their product. Basically anything that isn't going to help someone consider your product as a solution, I would ignore it. Basically, whenever I think about content marketing, I usually try to think about it in a 20-80% rule type of thing, where if we were to take all of the content topics that we could possibly go after, what are the 20% of topics that we would expect to drive 80% of the results? And then obviously there's going to be that other 80% that's only going to drive 20% of the results. So we obviously want to go out after those low effort, high reward topics. And usually the best way to describe them is going to be these bottom of the funnel type of keywords. So in this case, there's a few ways that we can categorize bottom of funnel keywords. Usually the best way, or the way I usually describe them, is either going to be keywords that are going to talk about your competitors. This is how people usually talk about the funnel. So we have our category keywords, we have our comparison, and then we have our alternative keywords. Basically, these two are going to be our bottom of funnel topics that we want to go after. And the page I had over here was an example of this. This is a startup middleware. Their top competitor is Datadog, a competitor that's pretty widely known across the industry. And even if someone is actively using Datadog, or if someone's considering Datadog, let's say they look at the price, they thought the price was too high, and now they're just wanting to see what other alternatives are in the market. The person considering Datadog already understands that this is a product that they want to use. They understand that this is a solution they want to use. So even though Datadog might not be the best product for them, they're still in the market for that type of solution. So basically what middleware is doing is positioning themselves as that main alternative to them. If anyone hits any hesitation point throughout that process, they are next in line as that main alternative. And of course, they're going to show you why they consider themselves to be that better alternative. They're going to call out specific features. They're going to give you a whole roundup. Obviously, this is the table that you'll find on most comparison pages. I actually preferably would like to keep comparison and alternative articles separate. So you can see here that it's targeting alternative and it's targeting the comparison topic. Basically, the comparison would be Datadog versus middleware, and then this would be the specific middleware article, just so you can capture two different types of search intents. If someone's looking up an alternative, they decide, okay, this product is right for me, then you're providing them with more ammunition. I have a specific example of this because I actually found Leadfeeder went with their competitor, which is Factors. They have an article right here that's 5 Leadfeeder alternatives that you need to know. Obviously, Factors is going to list themselves as that number one option. Once I was like, okay, Leadfeeder isn't right for me. Factors sounds pretty interesting. I'm going to do a little bit more research. I go here and I'm like, Leadfeeder versus factors.com. See if that comes up. And then they have another article that's dedicated as that comparison page. This is basically their opportunity where I was talking about before, where they now go into the actual specifics of how the two products match up against each other. And this is a specific example of how Factors got me as a client. I had no other touch points with them. I just found them through SEO. That was my full buyer's process right there. So if you're a startup, that's what can possibly happen with other people considering your product. They might find a solution that they're interested in. They decide that solution, for whatever reason, isn't the right solution for them. They're going to look at who else is in the market. Your job is basically position yourself as that next in line option within that market. So that's the alternative comparison route. Category, still in the same sense. I'm going to go back to the Leadfeeder example because I know this is how I initially found them. I first typed in best website visitor tracking software, and I believe Leadfeeder has an article. Yep, as you can see, I clicked on this previously. And this category content, if you're looking up the guide to the best website visitor tracking, Leadfeeder is basically going to explain themselves as that number one option within that category. It looks like they actually didn't really do it in this article, but I think these two would probably be a better example of what I'm talking about here. So instead of it just being a typical article, it's an actual roundup of the best options within that category. So you could see here the best visitor identification tracking tools and software. And then we have Ruler Analytics here, which is the main company I'm on, which is weird because they don't have anything in the navigation, but you get the point. So when it comes to product aware and most aware, that is when the user is basically familiar with the solutions they have at their disposal. Obviously, they know a problem exists. They know there's a product out there that helps with that problem. And then when they're at the most aware stage, that's basically them saying, okay, we understand this is the specific type of solution that we need. These are the products within that solution category. Now it's a matter of finding what the best option is within that category. And basically what I was saying here is when you're at that most aware stage, that's when alternative category and comparison content comes into play. This is the last stage of users before they make that final decision. So obviously this is the category you're going to want to focus on the most. And then you'll want to make your way back up. It's a flip, so you want to work your way backwards. But just to give you an idea of how I usually think about it, so most aware, they understand the companies that fit that solution category. When they're problem aware, usually they'll understand that there's a specific problem that they have, but they just don't really know if there's any solution out there for that problem. If you didn't know there was like a way to automate your invoices, you want to automate your invoices, you don't know of any solutions out there. Maybe there's an article dedicated that shows you how you can automate invoices. And obviously, if your product is invoicing software, that's when you would basically show them, how you can solve that problem using your product. You want to show them what your product is capable of as a solution. Obviously, that's when they become solution aware. And then at the very top, unaware, this is probably a category you're going to want to stay away from the most just because the user really doesn't understand they have a problem. There hasn't been any intent to show that they need a solution for that problem. So when you're at the unaware stage, basically, it's a matter of highlighting to your reader or your audience that they have a problem that they might want to consider. But really, if you're a startup and funds are finite and you really need to get content going, just start with the most aware category. That's really where you're going to see the most bang for your buck. So the next thing I want to talk about here is basically building authority to your website. This is something that you're pretty much always going to have to do in SEO. And especially if you're a startup, you're going to be starting with a brand new website. And yeah, you're basically going to be starting from scratch here. So in the case of link building, I'm sure most advice you're going to hear is that you should do outreach to get your links. You should build them manually. I'm basically here to say that there's just an easier way to do this. It's going to save you a lot of time and make your life a whole lot easier. Basically, the thing that I usually recommend is to create link assets where people can basically link to you automatically. The biggest one that I always recommend is going after statistics. I think that's the easiest one right here. And I'm going to use UserPilot as a really quick example. They have a whole article dedicated to customer onboarding statistics. And you can see down here, these are the article or the other websites that are currently linking to them. So if I click on them, I think it said it was like 166 referring domains that are linking to this page. They have links from HubSpot. They have links from other websites. Some of them I don't really recognize, but they didn't have to do any outreach at all here. Basically, these websites were writing an article about onboarding. They started looking up onboarding statistics to pull in data, basically to add to their own article. There's this really nice roundup of all of these statistics right here. They're going to pull it from that article, use it in their content, and then basically cite back to UserPilot as a resource or as a citation within that content. So they got a link from HubSpot, didn't even have to do anything. 74% of potential customers will switch to other solutions if the onboarding process is complicated. Boom, I could just copy this, add it to my content, and then link back to them. So really not a whole lot of work done there. I would also recommend looking into trend articles. I see those typically perform pretty well. SaaS onboarding trends. Tab. Of course, UserPilot is also going to have an article dedicated to this. So this is going to be your thought leadership content. Basically, this is going to talk about all of the insights on customer onboarding that you need to know, basically what you expect for the future. And usually I find these work pretty well. If you actually have a personality that's writing this article, like if you're a founder and you have a popular LinkedIn presence, you should be the one writing this article and promoting it. People are curious about what you want to say and they want to know what you have to say. This is a good article to really talk about what you expect to happen. I would also maybe say this one will be a little bit more resource intensive, but another thing that I see works pretty well is actually creating different resources on maybe like an industry report. And this is actually like data that you're pulling yourself that talks about a specific industry. I find these work extremely well, especially in the case where you don't even have to distribute it. Really, you just have to create it and then usually people will find it and link to you. But again, that's something where you're going to actually have to go out and create the data for it. So something to consider, but it might be a lot of work just for that. At the end of the day, if you're a startup and you're working on finite funds and it's a race against time to get your SEO moving, you're trying to get more users, trying to get more signups. Really, the thing with SEO is it's almost endless for what you could target. When you're thinking about what you can go after, really try to break it down based on what you think will require 20% of effort and drive those 80% of results. Basically, if you focus on vanity, like if you're focused on traffic or if you're just creating anything, it's just going to be a waste of time for you. You're going to waste your time and money building out these assets that no one's going to read. It's not going to bring you in any business. I guess at the end of the day, if you're doing content marketing and you're trying to do SEO, just make sure you go spearfishing with your content. Be as specific as possible. Understand that you have your ICP and your positioning laid out. You have their full journey mapped out. And basically, when they're at the end of that journey, start with the topics that you think are going to have the most conversion intent.